Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Sunday meeting. I am very happy to be here with you today. Today, we're going to have a very special meeting with a very dear friend, speaking to us all the way from Boston. And I just would like to welcome everyone. If you are online with us, as always, I would love for you to say hi. Let me know you were there. Let me know you can hear me and that the broadcast is going on okay. Hi, Carlos. Carlos is always one of the first ones, and Juan as well. So I'm assuming you guys can hear me well and everything is okay. You can just put a little blurb on the comments for me before we move on. We're going to start with our daily. Oh, good. Thank you, Juan. Thank you so much. Good morning, Gisele. Yes, perfect, guys. Thank you so much for the feedback. So let's get started. And today, hello, Marcus. Thank you so much. We're starting with Living Spring. The lesson is 41. The title is On the Difficult Road. I will never leave you nor forsake you. The word of the Lord does not refer only to sustaining one's physical life on the stony climb of the ascent. Much more than food for the body, we need food for the spirit. The cells of the body may experience hunger and clamor for ordinary soup, but the necessities and wishes, impulses, and emotions of the soul often cause immeasurable afflictions, demanding ampler spiritual nourishment. There are times when our innermost reserves are profoundly depleted. Our strength seems exhausted, and our hopes retreat in apathy. Darkness invades our souls, as if we were enveloped in dark night. And as happens to nature under the mantle of night, even though we have springs of understanding and flowers of goodwill in the vast expanse of our inner world, everything remains veiled by the fog of our troubles. However, even then, the All-Merciful does not abandon us completely to the darkness of our doubts and disappointments. Just as He makes effulgent stars shine in the sky, unveiling a constellated pathway of the firmament to the traveler lost in the world, He also lights the fire of new conviction and lofty aspirations in the sky of our ideals, so that our spirit does not get lost on its journey towards the higher life. I will never leave you nor forsake you, promises the divine goodness, neither loneliness nor abandonment. Heavenly providence continues watching over us. Therefore, let us hold to the Therefore, let us hold to the comforting certainty that every storm is followed by a tranquil atmosphere and that there is never a night without the dawn. Wow, what a precious lesson. Again, it was from Living Spring, number 41, On the Difficult Road. So if you would like to review it and read on your own, I highly, highly recommend. It's a very, very beautiful passage, reminding us that we are never forsaken, never abandoned, and never alone. So with that, I invite you to join me on our opening prayer, raising our thoughts and hearts to our beloved Master, asking for His guidance this morning, asking for inspiration, helping us to open to the message and to connect, to love, to the good spirits, to the words that will be brought to all of us. We ask a special blessing for our friend Nahur, so that he can be inspired and guided in his delivery. And we would like to express our gratitude for this new opportunity, for the ability to gather today here online and to be able to reconnect with what is truly essential and important in our lives. For everything that we have for this new day and for this moment, we thank you so much. Bless us all, and so be it. All right, dear friends, I have here the pleasure of bringing in my friend Nahur from Boston, um, Spirit Society of Massachusetts. Is that right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
Allan Kardec Spiritist Society of Massachusetts.
Alan Kardec Spirit Society of Massachusetts. Yes. So I have the pleasure of knowing Nahur from the Spirits Movement. We have been in some conferences together. He is a very dedicated worker and has incredible work with the children and youth, not only in his area, but in different conferences and things like that. So I really, really appreciate you being here with us this morning and collaborating with our series of lectures. Thank you so much. And I'm going to be right here. If you need anything, just say, hey, Susanna, help me out. But everything's going to help. Everything's going to go okay. All right,
Thank you.
now, thank you again.
Yes. So, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever you are. It is a pleasure to be here with you this morning, sharing some of the good tidings from the gospel. I found the message this morning very inspiring. And every time I go deeper into this topic that we're going to study this morning or this moment, it's like an onion, new layer kind of gets deeper, gets uncovered. So my name is Nahur Fonseca. I live here in Boston, Massachusetts. I have been working with the Allan Kardec Spiritist Society of Massachusetts for since 2002 when I came to the US. I came to study. I have a PhD in computer science. And in the Spiritist movement, working with teens and young people like children have always been like my passion, my most dedicated work. But here I also coordinate the studies in English for our group with other friends. And one of the things that I have been doing the Spiritist movement in the United States for a long time now is to organize the Family Spirits Retreat. So if you look at this little circle in the slide here, it's the 18th year that we are putting together this retreat. And usually it's a beautiful event in a park in Connecticut where we gather together in person with centers from the Northeast, like New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and others. But last year, because of the pandemic, we did not have our event in person. Instead, we created an event online and we opened it up for the whole world. It was very nice to see teenagers participate from Brazil, from El Salvador, from Uruguay, from Spain. It was very nice to open it up. Of course, lots of teams from the United States participated as well. And this year, on July 10th and 11th, we are going to do a hybrid Family Spirits retreat. One day it's going to be in person with mini retreats in different states. And the other day is going to be online, and everybody's going to be together to study, celebrate, and just be with one another. And the topic we chose for this year is from John 13:35. By this, everyone you know, you are my disciples, if you love one another. And that's what we're going to talk today. And as I study for this topic, I discovered many things. For instance, I did not remember, right, that this passage comes from the Last Supper. So it's interesting to kind of get a little history of context of what supper meant at that time. So I watched a lecture by Haroldo Dutra Dias about this. It's very good with context and history. And then I was learning a few things. For instance, many of us, right, uh, kind of summarize the Old Testament simply in Moses and the Ten Commandments, and that's it. But there's a lot in the Old Testament, right? There are 10 books in the Old Testament, and there's Abraham and Isaac and other prophets like Jacob. And Abraham is considered the patriarch. And there are many things interesting about Abraham. At the time of Abraham, there was no 10 commandments. There was no temple, right? Moses did not create at that time, right? There was no rituals, right? So how did Abraham express or celebrate his religiosity? So Abraham was visited by messengers. And messengers, we understand today that they are angels. But not angels with wings like we have here in the West. Angels with beard and old man that go and appear and talk to Abraham, right? And one of the things that happened, Abraham's name before was Abram, right? And it was usual when a prophet had let's say, received a mission from God, that he would change his name to include God's name. And that's how he became from Abram to Abraham. And that initial, that name means the father, right? God as a father. So Abraham is considered the patriarch, the father of all the nations, right? And the way he celebrated his religiosity was by having supper, by having meals, breakfast. And so the idea is that the patriarch would gather the family around and share a meal. And as the patriarch, he gets to, break the bread and invite people, set out the table, all of that. And there was a ritual around supper, right? And that tradition, that ritual, included washing the feet. So if you remember, or if you can imagine, right, you are in the desert, walking, I don't know, many, many miles, right, to go visit someone. And then when you get to his house or her house to have supper, the first thing you do is washing your feet. Now, if you're in the desert for like, I don't know, an hour or more, and then somebody washes your feet with cold water, that refreshes even the perispirit, right? That's the idea. So everything around the ritual before supper had a meaning, and that meaning was to welcome you, to welcome the person. You would not have supper with someone if you did not want to get intimate with someone, right? So the whole idea of the supper was really to share, to celebrate, to be with, the communion, right? That connection, that human connection. And that was the way that religiosity was celebrated by Abraham and many others before Moses, because only with Moses you have the 10 Commandments and everything else. So supper is a communion. And what is fasting then? Fasting, we understand, is, not eating. But at that time, fasting was not just not eating. It was more like being alone, not being with someone, being alone, being isolated. So you could eat grains during your fasting, but if you're not in communion with others, that means you're still fasting, right? So just little things for us to understand. And just one more thing I want to say about this is, here in the West, right, when we can have dinner with someone, maybe fast food, and we share that meal with someone, right? But that's different than the supper, the traditional supper in the Old Testament, which is really being with one another, right? The meal is not the most important thing. The communion is, right? And I wanted to bring that point to us here. All right. So, as I said, this passage, John 13:35, if you love one another, comes from the Last Supper. And Jesus told his disciples, right, before the supper in Luke 22:15, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before my suffering. So now we can understand this a little better, right? Jesus wasn't just trying to, drink some wine, eating some bread and some lamb. That was not what he was talking about here. He's talking about communion, being intimate with the 12 disciples, the closest disciples, so that he could share what he was going to go through, so he could get communion. And now imagine, right, that we know that Jesus is a Christ. And from the book, On the Pathway to the Light by Emmanuel, we know that, Jesus is just one of a group of Christs, right? That, for instance, gathered around the sun when the planet Earth was being formed, right? So when Jesus was looking forward to that supper, imagine the communion on the spiritual side of the supper, right? The spiritual companions of Jesus who came to help him with his suffering that was coming. So Jesus wanted to share that spiritual communion with his closest disciples so that he could start to get a sense of what that would look like. There's so many things that starts connecting, right, when we see things like this. So, for instance, that sentence, it's coming a little later when Jesus says, and now, in my Father's house there are many mansions. And if it weren't so, I have told you. So I need to go to prepare you a place, right? What place is he talking about? Is it, like a colony, like Nahur? Is it another planet? Is it a physical place? No. It is this spiritual place, a spiritual realm. So Jesus was going to set the example for us, to prepare us to be that example for ourselves, right? So there's so many things that connect when we start studying, going a little deeper, uncovering layers of that onion, right? So let's see what's next here. In the book Good Tidings by Umberto de Campos and Francis Xavier, the Spirit goes into more detail about this Last Supper. And one of the things he says, right, is that Jesus is explaining to the disciples why the events they're about to pass were important. Why did he have to go through all that? And one of the things he says is there's a difference between a world victory and a spiritual victory. In the world, a victory usually looks like a political, economical, or military power. Some sort of, it's always the stronger winning in battles, or the richer winning at the expense of others, and so forth, right? It's always some kind of temporary victory. And we can just look at all the previous empires, right? And how they all passed. It was unimaginable at the time of Christ, right? That, the Roman Empire would ever perish, but it did. And then on the other hand, you have the spiritual victory, which usually looks like self-sacrifice, humility, and love. So Jesus needed to set that example and show what a spiritual victory looks like for us. So he was going to, I'll just read the next slide and then come back. Very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. Anyone who loves their life will lose it, while anyone who hates their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. And this is right around that same, right before the supper, the John 12. The supper is John 13, right? So it's right there when Jesus is talking to the disciples. And here he's talking about the spiritual victory, right? You need to die, you need to lose your life, you need to hate your life. What does that mean? So in the Gospel according to Spiritism, Allan Kardec will define hate not as we understand today hate, which is kind of a negative feeling, like of maybe violent feeling, right? But hate, as at the time, I don't know if it's the Greek root or whatever, but Allan Kardec will explain there, it just means to love less, right? So you need to love more your spiritual life, let's say, than your material, your victory or in the world, right? So that's what he's saying. And he was going to show that and give the example, right? And resurrect after 3 days and show the spiritual victory that is eternal, right? That is lasting. Okay. Now, another thing that happens, right? Jesus knew that he was going to be betrayed. And you can read in the gospel the many times where he says that. And the most amazing things happens because as Jesus sits at the table, right, and starts breaking the bread, right, all of that, he was playing the role of the patriarch, like Abraham. Right? He was the father, and the disciples were his spiritual children, right? And when he says that he is going to be betrayed, the disciples start asking around, well, who is going to betray you? Is it me, master? Is it me? They start kind of debating. And then Jesus says, this is the one that I'll give the bread to. And as he is breaking the bread, right? Just like in our traditional birthday parties, right? When you cut the cake and you're going to give the first piece to someone, remember that it's always who's going to get the first piece. It's very important. Same thing with the bread in the supper. Who is going to get the first piece? And in that night, Jesus chooses to give the first piece of bread to Judas. And he tells Judas, what you have to do it quick. So it's the example of forgiving before being offended, which is something like unheard of. And nobody knew that Judas was the one that's going to betray, but he did. When he said that, people thought, oh, Judas is the treasurer. He has the coins, so maybe he's going to buy more bread or buy water or wine or something. That's what he needs to do. So Judas leaves to do what he has to do, right? And it's so important, right? Because in this spiritual victory, right, Jesus symbolized, or he became for us, a teacher, a model, role model of all these stereotypical sufferings in our planet. He suffered betrayal, abandonment, violence. He was alone. He was jailed. So everybody who suffers in this planet knows, right, that Jesus also suffered and what he did. And that example, that's the spiritual victory, right? That if you can go through all of it, resigned or understanding, right? It's not much as resigned, but you renounce yourself, you renounce your own life, right, for the greater good. That's what he was doing, right? He needed to give that message as the Christ, as the governor of the planet. That is what was needed, and that he was going to do. All right, there's a few more things I want to say about this, but let's see. I think I have another slide for that. Yes, right here. So right after Jesus said that he was going to be betrayed and he was going to suffer, he says, but there will be a victory for the kingdom of God, right? As soon as he said that, and everybody forgot about the suffering part, and they start talking about, okay, when the kingdom of God comes, when the kingdom of heaven comes, who is going to do what? Who is the greatest? Probably Simon Peter, because he's the oldest. He's going to be in charge of this or in charge of that. And Levi, he's the one who can read. He's going to be in charge of this or in charge of that. And John, who is the, loved disciple, right? He's going to be in charge of this or that. So they start discussing who's going to be the greatest, right? And at that moment, Jesus was talking to one of the disciples, and then he starts hearing who's going to be the greatest, who's going to be the greatest, and then he stops. He stands up. He removes his tunic. So now he is naked from the upper body, right? And then he gets a piece of cloth and wraps around his waist, covering his kidneys. And the disciples were just like, what? They couldn't believe it. Because the day before, Jesus was entering Jerusalem on top of a donkey, right? And people were saying hosannas, throwing flowers. And that was the kind of reception you give to a Messiah, which is the most important prophet in the Old Testament, the most expected figure in the Old Testament. But now the disciples looked at him and saw Jesus as a slave. That's how the slaves used to dress up in the Eastern at that time. And maybe the image we have of slaves is not the same at that time. At that time, you could become a slave, for instance, if you did not pay a debt. So it was not uncommon to have these educated Greek philosopher teachers to be a slave because they had some debt they couldn't pay off. And those slaves, because they were educated, they would be brought in to serve the family inside the house. And they would teach their children. They would do homework with the children, right? So it's the the dream come true, right? You have someone, a Greek philosopher, to teach your kids and educate them and teach languages and whatever, philosophy, right? So Jesus was dressed up as like a house slave at that time. And he starts washing the disciples' feet, just like the ritual, like the tradition was to welcome everybody. And Peter refuses. No, master, you're not going to wash my feet. But then Jesus wanting to show, right, that how important it is to serve. If you're a Christian, that's what you do. You serve. he said, Peter, if I don't wash your feet, you have nothing to do with me. And then Peter said, then wash my hands and my face as well. To which Jesus says, well, I don't need to wash everything, just the feet, okay? You are pure. You don't, just need to wash your feet. So it's a very, the disciples were still kind of shocked, right? And that's the word that Umberto de Campos uses in the book. Like, what is happening here, right? So Jesus had this ability to teach lessons that was impressive, right? And would impress the senses, like the one that said it is easier to pass a camel through, the opening of a needle, right? The head of a needle, than a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. So always impressive figures, right? Too very memorable. So and then Jesus says, right, as the teaching for this, now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. So he's setting the example right there, that there should not be discussion about who is the greatest, right? The greatest of all is that who serves all, right? That I'm kind of quoting here what he said. So he wanted to show the disciples, right, that they should not try to be bigger or greater than their fellow disciples or apostles, right? Okay. Now, I'm going to fast forward, and then we're going to come back. But I'm going to fast forward a little bit. And after the events of the crucifixion, the disciples were very sad, and they did not know what to do. It was a moment of anxiety, right? They were afraid of being persecuted, right? How could the master just let himself be killed, right? Why didn't he do anything? So some disciples were on the road to Emmaus, and then this traveler comes by, and he starts talking to them. And he says, why are you so sad? Oh, you don't know what happened? No, what happened? The Messiah was killed, and that's why we're sad. And then this traveler starts quoting scripture, saying, but this thing, they had to happen. The prophet said, all of the things are supposed to happen. And he starts comforting them, right? But they didn't recognize him yet, who the traveler was. And then when they get to their house in Emmaus, right, where they're supposed to go, the most surprising thing happens. The traveler sits at the head of the table, gets the bread, and starts breaking the bread and giving it to the disciples. At that moment, they realize, it's you, Master. So he was just try to imagine, right, that the words, talking, it helps to comfort, but it's the act, the experience of being together, that communion, that helped them identify Jesus, because that's what he did. Imagine how many meals they shared together. That's how they identified Jesus, right? And I had this quote in Portuguese. I could not find a good translation in English, but it's like, words can convince, but example drags, right? The power of examples. And I think the the message for us there, right? When Jesus was, that connects again here with this, right? So I'm going to read the commandment. A new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. And by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another, right? So they didn't recognize him just by words alone, but when they were communing, right, having a meal together, that moment of communion, that's when they realized who he was. So that is kind of the feeling or experience that I want to recreate here with you this morning. What it must have been like to be with Jesus and having meals with him and just feeling loved by him. Like a father loves her little children. So this same passage, right, is also in the Living Spring that we read this morning, chapter 15. And in the end, Emmanuel kind of summarized, right, with this. Therefore, let us extend pure and simple fraternity all around us by mutually helping one another. The fraternity that labors and assists, understands and forgives, amid the humility and service that ensure the victory of the good. Wherever we are, let us practice fraternity, recalling the word of the Lord, who clearly and surely asserted, by this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. And that was, this idea of being fraternal, and as you were close to one another, right, like brothers, there are always these little fights. You forgive each other because you love one another, right? No matter how many times there are these disagreements, right? So that's why we wanted. That's the feeling that we wanted to bring about this year in the Family Spirituals Retreat, right? And I wanted to talk a little bit more about this and share with you today the proposal, right, for this event this year. There are many spiritist centers in the United States, and we don't get to be together too much, right? We're very spread out. So you wanted to have a moment where we could come together, right? And this year, differently from last year when the pandemic was still very new and we were being very careful, this time we have the vaccine. We understand better how to protect ourselves wearing masks. So we decided to do a hybrid event, like where you could have a mini in-person event and also an online event. And the idea was just to be in communion with one another again. If you remember from the message that Susanna read in the beginning, how there's always a dawn after the night. And I think when Jesus was leaving, right? Oops, sorry. When Jesus was, about to be crucified, right? He also promised the disciples that he was going to send another comforter, another consoler, right? And if you remember when I said about fasting, right? There was a time when the Pharisees asked Jesus, right? Why your disciples don't fast? And then Jesus answered, well, wouldn't it be rude to fast when you are in the wedding with the groom? So the Pharisee understood very well what Jesus meant by being rude, right? You don't go to a party, a wedding party, and stay isolated, right? Because that's the meaning of fasting. You don't stay in communion. You isolate yourself, right? But he did not understand that Jesus was referring to himself as the groom. So Jesus compared, right, let's say the coming of the kingdom of heaven to earth as a wedding, right? And many times in the gospel, right? And he is the groom. And we have been engaged with Jesus, right, since he came. And the marriage will be consummated when we finally have a regenerated world of where love, right, is present everywhere. So since he left until now, we have been fasting because we don't have his physical presence anymore, right? So you can think of it this way, but there's another type of fasting that we have been through this past year, with many spiritual centers closed or with activities very reduced. We haven't been seeing each other so much anymore, right? And that's one of the things we wanted to kind of address or provide some kind of assistance here, right? We thought, well, we miss one another, just want to be together again, right? And maybe start that movement of being together again around the table, right? With Jesus and the disciples breaking bread together. So we wanted to bring that feeling back to the Family Spirit Retreat by having this mini in-person event, and also having a shared virtual event with all the Spiritist people in the United States and others, English-speaking countries too, of course. And this year, we're inspired by 3 words: unification, inclusion, and expansion. So one novelty this year is we're going to have an online session where people who are not Spiritists or they're new to Spiritism, they come in and they can feel what it's like to be in a Spiritist center, like in a virtual event. So you're going to walk in the center, maybe talk to someone about some books in the library, maybe talk to someone over in the in passes, or maybe do a little mini study. It's going to be like a Spiritist center. And the people working in the Spiritist center are going to be the workers from all over the country. So we're going to have, if you work at the reception in Boston, you'll be there. But if you work at the reception in Florida, you can be there too. And now we have, 2 receptionists from different centers welcoming people to this virtual environment. And so we are trying to, one of the reasons we are doing these lectures, right, is to kind of spread the word out there about what's going to happen. And if you have a friend who is not Spiritist or he's curious, like to know more about Spiritism, you could bring him to this event. You could host him and walk with him around and help him answer any questions they may have. So I have some pictures here of the Family Spirits Retreat. This usually when it happens in person, this is 2016. There are about a dozen centers that collaborate, and it's very fun. We usually do a play for kids, but it's for everybody from 0 to 99, right, years old to participate. And last year we did it online, and this year, as I said before, we are going to do it in hybrid, and we hope to see you there. Susanna, if you have any comments or questions, if you'd like to talk a little bit about the message or about the event, I'm here to help you.
Yeah, no, first of all, I really appreciated the topic. It's really it's really amazing how rich the gospel is with all its cultural nuances that so many times escape us, right? We it's amazing because we often do a very shallow reading of the gospel, if you will, right?
Yeah.
There's so many layers to absolutely every event and everything. So appreciate you bringing this historical background that helps us to better understand the meaning of the passage, as well as the idea for the retreat, which is pretty remarkable. I can say, growing up in the spirits movement, from birth, participating in spiritual retreats in my youth
Yeah.
is one of the most dear experiences that I bring in my heart. So
Yeah.
I think that's a true gift that we can give to our kids, to our youngsters. And so appreciate the work you guys do, and also ask everybody, we have people with us now and people who listen to this lecture later to please help sharing the word in your social media, and just talking to people, inviting people. It is a work that has been growing. Right now, he started like small, and now he's at a national level.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's and it allows for these. I I mean, I've been reflecting about distancing during the pandemic, and just this morning, I put a picture with some friends on my Instagram, just kind of, you know, speaking about how much I miss them. And so it's just nice to have this opportunity to connect with people, either in presence or even online. But I think we are so hungry for connection at this point. It's funny because we are connected through social media, but we are craving the supper, the
Yeah.
intimacy,
Yeah.
and I think these events, they do offer some of that, even if it's online, because there is a build up of that intimacy throughout the whole event, with music, with interactions, with so it kind of offers a sense of closeness, a little different than just being here listening to a lecture and etc. So those were my comments. Um, just asking people to share, and again, appreciate you being here with us today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. As I said, you know, it was a pleasure for me to just study about more about this topic because it chose it for the event. And usually, the inspiration comes first, and then we go after and study and
Yes.
do the research.
Yes.
And I've been finding out all of this, right? How um, this separation from Jesus, right? Is we're fasting, and the pandemic kind of caused that, and maybe you were getting better in a better situation now, even though we know from you know the work we have been studying about the planetary transition, there's more to come, right? There's more harder challenges for us to overcome
Hmm.
until we can really love one another in this planet and say it authentically that everybody loves one another. um, but we need to come together, we need to do it together, right? We have a great community of spiritists in the United States. It's nice to be able to rely on each other a little bit or lean on each other a little bit, right? And
Yes, absolutely. We can do so much more.
we have been doing some organization meetings, and it's
Uh-huh.
just so amazing how the other day there were 10 states in
Uh-huh.
one organization meeting. Like people from Texas, Chicago, Florida,
Oh, awesome.
Connecticut,
Right.
Massachusetts, New York. It was very nice, right, to see everybody there. And they are exchanging experiences. Oh, we do this well, but I would like to help on this, and they're helping each other already. So the event hasn't happened yet, but it has already been successful in one of its goals.
Amazing. Yes, in promoting union and yeah, that's wonderful. He's already producing good fruits.
That's right.
All right. Great. So we are going to close. I'm going to put you on backstage for a moment. Thank you again. All right, my dear friends. So I hope you really enjoy as much as I did today's lecture and meditation. We are going to close our meeting now with our final prayer. So if you'd like to join me in closing your eyes or relaxing and raising our thoughts and prayers again to our beloved Master, asking for his blessing at the end of our meeting, thanking Jesus and God for the opportunity that we had to be here, for Jesus' presence in our lives, for his journey to be with us, to deliver in person all these messages that today are the sun shining in our ways and helping us to see with greater clarity and to understand the meaning of our lives and guide our actions and thoughts. So we are very thankful. Thank you for today's message, for all the teachings, the clarifications, and we ask our Lord to continue to guide us in our efforts, in our commitments, sustaining our hope and our will to grow and to manifest all the divine potentialities that lie within each one of us. Bless the world, bless all the people who are in our thoughts and prayers, all the ones who are suffering, all the ones who are in darkness, all the ones that are feeling alone and abandoned and hopeless. To those we pray, even with greater strength, asking our dear Lord to be with them and to hold them so that they can find, as we have found, the light, the truth, and the meaning to our own existences. Thank you again for today. Bless us all throughout this week. And may we all return next week or whenever we can connect to continue to study and to grow. Thank you, and so be it. All right, so we are closing our meeting here. Thank you so much for being with us. Remember that we continue with all our activities. We are open online. We have meetings in Portuguese, meetings in English. You can just check our Facebook for all our activities. We are also present on YouTube, clsg.us. And also we continue to, although we are physically closed, we continue to accept donations. We will be looking for another place. We will be reopening eventually. So your contributions are going to be a huge help for this new phase to come. Okay, thank you so much. I will see you guys soon.